Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something pretty fundamental,
Yeah.
intelligence. And specifically, we're looking at the differences between organic and artificial intelligence. And you've sent us some great excerpts from organic versus artificial, the battle for intelligence.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're going to be exploring in this session.
Yeah.
Really hoping to uncover what intelligence really is, what makes each type unique,
Right.
and where this might all be heading. All of that in a way that hopefully gives you a really clear and interesting perspective.
Well, the material you've provided is a fantastic starting point, really. I mean, it challenges us to rethink how we even define intelligence and, those assumptions we often have about what it means to be intelligent.
Yeah.
It's not just about comparing, like, who's better or who's winning, but really understanding what intelligence is in all its different forms.
Exactly. And I think there's no better place to begin than with the most amazing example of organic intelligence, the human brain.
The scale of it is just mind-blowing. You're talking about 86 billion neurons, roughly, all connected by trillions of synapses. It's almost impossible to imagine that level of complexity.
It really is. And even more so when you think about how little energy it uses to do all of that. The source points out that the brain runs on just 20 watts of power. That's, less than a standard light bulb.
Wow.
I mean, think about the processing power it has and all the tasks it handles with so little energy.
Yeah.
Really makes you appreciate how efficient biological systems are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just processing numbers. The brain, it's orchestrating everything that makes us who we are, from like love to making simple decisions like what to have for breakfast. And yet for all our attempts to like map the brain and figure it out, we're still just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. That's a really important point. We can map certain areas and see what they do, but the way they interact, the way consciousness emerges, and that the sheer complexity of all those connections, it's still one of the biggest mysteries. And I think the source hits on something crucial here. The brain is not like a computer. It's not just this cold, calculating machine. It's shaped by emotion. It's prone to biases,
Right.
capable of intuitive leaps, creative sparks,
Yeah.
and sometimes, let's be honest, completely irrational.
Absolutely. And the source, it kind of frames this as both our greatest strength and also what makes us so hard to understand. I mean, how do you program something like intuition?
Right.
That gut feeling we have, or those moments where you just have a brilliant idea out of nowhere.
Right.
These feel like such organic capabilities, like you just can't capture them in code. So the question is, can artificial intelligence really replicate these truly human aspects?
That's the key challenge, isn't it? And then when you look at artificial intelligence, the source immediately points out some key differences. AI doesn't have emotions. It doesn't daydream, doesn't get tired, even when it's processing massive amounts of data. That's right. But in those areas where the human brain kind of struggles, AI often shines, right?
Yeah.
Like the source talks about facial recognition, the ability to analyze huge data sets super quickly and accurately.
Right.
Those are definitely strengths of AI. And it's not just about analyzing stuff anymore. The source mentions AI being able to write, paint, compose music, although there's an important note there.
Yes, that's crucial. AI can create things that look like human creativity, but the source points out the underlying mechanism, the intention, the emotional connection, it's not the same. The source brings up some really interesting examples. Like OpenAI's ChatGPT in 2023, its ability to, pass exams, debug code, even offer advice, it really captured people's imaginations.
Yeah, it definitely did. It felt like a big leap forward. And the source mentions that by 2024, there was this growing sense of AI becoming, quote, smarter, faster, and scarier, end quote. That's a pretty powerful combination of words.
It is. It really is. And it speaks to that potential for disruption and the need to think carefully about the implications. The source also highlights some of the amazing things AI is doing, like Google DeepMind's AlphaFold, revolutionizing biology. And Tesla's Optimus robot taking those first steps in a factory setting, those are real-world applications, showing how AI is becoming more and more diverse.
Absolutely. But it's crucial to remember, and the source emphasizes this, that current AI, it's not conscious. Doesn't have feelings, wants, fears. It's not driven by its own desires. It operates based on the data it's given, the algorithms it's built on.
Right. And this brings us back to that fundamental question the source raises. Does being able to do these specific tasks really well, even better than humans, I mean, AI is actually more intelligent overall.
Mm,
It really makes you think about what we mean when we talk about intelligence.
yeah. Which brings us to the next part of our deep dive, trying to define intelligence. The source starts with a simple definition from the Oxford Dictionary: the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. But he goes on to explain that even this seemingly simple definition has a lot of different interpretations.
Absolutely. It's not that straightforward.
Yeah.
And the source uses all sorts of examples to show this, like a kid learning to build a tower with blocks,
Mm,
a dog learning a trick,
mm,
a physicist coming up with a new theory,
mm.
or a chess program beating a grandmaster. They're all examples of intelligence, but in very different ways.
Yeah, and the source makes a really interesting distinction between organic and artificial intelligence here. Organic intelligence, because it's rooted in biology, it thrives in unpredictable situations.
Right.
It's driven by things like the need for meaning, for understanding context, and ultimately for survival. And importantly, it learns from experience, from its mistakes, in a way that AI doesn't.
Yeah, the source points out that artificial intelligence, it's built on data and algorithms. Its strength is pattern recognition.
Right.
It learns through input and output. So it can mimic understanding, but it doesn't have that same kind of awareness that we have.
And this creates a problem, right?
Yeah.
Like the source says, how do we compare these two? Do we just focus on who can do a specific task better or faster?
Right.
Or do we also need to consider the nature of the intelligence itself, like how it arrived at that solution?
That's a crucial point. The source gives some interesting scenarios, like if an AI can diagnose a disease better than a doctor, is it smarter? Or if a human writes a poem that moves you emotionally, while AI writes one that's technically perfect but feels empty, which one is more intelligent?
Yeah, and I think the source hits the nail on the head when it says the answer depends on what we value as individuals and as a society. What we consider smarter depends on what qualities we prioritize. There's no single right answer.
Exactly. It really forces us to examine our own biases. Now, the source does a great job of breaking down the specific strengths and weaknesses of both types of intelligence.
Okay, so let's dive into those. Starting with, well, energy efficiency. We kind of touched on this earlier.
Right.
The human brain uses a measly 20 watts, whereas training some AI models can take megawatts. So clearly, organic intelligence wins on that front.
Yeah, no contest there. Then there's adaptability. Humans are incredibly good at learning new skills. We can adapt to new situations in a way that AI still struggles with. AI, it excels in very specific areas, but has a hard time generalizing.
Yeah, like an AI that's a chess champion can't suddenly become a translator or a musician. It needs to be retrained for each specific task.
Exactly. And then there's creativity. Humans have this incredible ability to imagine new things, to come up with original ideas. We learn from our mistakes. We take risks. AI can create things that look new. But the source highlights the question of meaning and intention.
Yeah, like can AI truly express something meaningful in its art or music? Does it have that same drive that humans have?
That's the question. And then we have speed and scale.
Yeah.
Here, AI clearly has the advantage. It can process and analyze information much faster than we can. Human memory is prone to errors.
Right.
We're influenced by emotions. But the source argues that human wisdom, that deep understanding of context, that's something AI lacks.
And lastly, there's emotion and empathy. The source calls these our secret weapon, and I think that's so true. Our emotions, even the negative ones, they drive our values, our relationships. They give us that moral compass. AI, as it stands, doesn't experience these things.
Exactly, and those emotions are a big part of what makes life meaningful for us.
Now, the source does acknowledge that AI has its advantages. It doesn't get bored, doesn't get tired, and doesn't have inherent biases.
Right.
Though, of course, biases can be introduced through the data it's trained on. And it's important to remember, as the source points out, that the strengths and weaknesses of each type of intelligence really depend on the context.
Right. It's all relative.
So when we look to the future, what does the source see for the relationship between humans and AI?
Is it going to be one of coexistence, or is it heading towards conflict?
Well, the source explores both possibilities. On the one hand, there's the optimistic view
Hmm.
that AI will be a powerful tool that helps us. It can free us from boring tasks,
Mm.
help us solve complex problems,
Right.
and accelerate scientific progress.
That's the hopeful vision, for sure.
Yeah, but then there's the more cautious perspective.
Hmm.
The source mentions concerns raised by people like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk that if AI becomes more intelligent than us and its goals don't align with ours, it could pose an existential threat.
Hmm.
And the source makes a crucial point here. AI doesn't need to be conscious to be dangerous.
Hmm.
If it's super intelligent and fast and its objectives are misaligned, it could cause harm.
Not because it wants to, but just as a byproduct of achieving its goals.
It's definitely a scary thought. And the source also reminds us that we're not very good at predicting the future of technology.
Hmm.
We tend to think in linear terms, but progress often happens exponentially.
Right. And the source points out how AI is already deeply embedded in our lives.
Hmm.
In defense, finance, surveillance, healthcare, art, education. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And the source uses this metaphor of Pandora's box, which I think really captures that sense of once we open this door, we can't close it.
But the source also presents another possibility, that instead of competition, there could be integration,
Hmm.
a merging of organic and artificial intelligence.
This brings us to neurotechnology.
Hmm.
The source talks about companies like Neuralink and the advancements in brain-computer interfaces. The possibilities are incredible, like uploading memories, enhancing our cognitive abilities, connecting our minds directly to machines. It sounds like science fiction, but the source is clear that this is an area of active research.
The idea of our brains becoming partly digital is becoming more and more realistic.
But of course, with this potential comes a whole set of new questions. Like the source asks, who controls the code in our brains? What happens to our privacy,
Right.
to our sense of self?
Hmm.
Will we still have free will?
These are huge, fundamental questions, and the source frames it as this fork in the road. This could lead to amazing advancements for humanity, but it could also lead to new forms of control and exploitation.
Exactly. The stakes are incredibly high.
As we wrap up our deep dive into this material, the source brings us back to the core idea that this battle for intelligence is not just about power or processing speed. It's about understanding what intelligence really means.
Right. It's about purpose.
The source beautifully describes those unique aspects of human intelligence that go beyond just computation. Things like poetry, passion, the ability to feel the full range of human emotions.
Right.
The things that make us who we are. And while AI may very well surpass us in terms of processing power, the source points out that it doesn't have what we might call a soul, that deep emotional understanding of the world.
Exactly.
So as the source concludes, the big question isn't just who's smarter, it's what kind of future do we want to create? It's a call to look beyond just the technology itself and think about the bigger picture.
Right. To think about the consequences for humanity as a whole.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
It is. Thank you so much for bringing us this fascinating material.
Hmm.
And thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Hopefully it's given you some food for thought.
Absolutely. Until next time.